At the family dinner, my son-in-law sneered, "You'll never be even half the man my father is." I calmly stood up and replied, "Fine, let your father pay all your bills from now on. I'm done helping." My daughter froze. "What? You've never given us a single penny?" That's when they finally learned the shocking truth. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Laverne Harper. I'm 64 years old, retired accountant living in Phoenix, Arizona. Spent 38 years crunching numbers for a Fortune 500 company before calling it quits. Always thought, if you take care of your family, they'll take care of you. Turns out I was keeping better books than life philosophies. My daughter Danielle used to be different. I remember when she was 7, running to hug me every time I came home from work, her pigtails bouncing. "Daddy's home," she'd squeal. That little girl grew up, got married 8 years ago to Brandon Mitchell, and somewhere along the way she transformed into someone I barely recognize. These days, when she looks at me, there's this coldness in her eyes, like she's mentally calculating whether I'm worth her time. Brandon, my son-in-law, is a completely different breed. Works as a manager at an auto dealership, drives cars he can barely afford, lives in a house that screams money he doesn't make. He's got this smirk permanently plastered on his face, the kind that says he knows something you don't. And his parents, Dennis and Lisa Mitchell, well, they treat their son like he's royalty and the rest of us like we're the help. The real kicker? Danielle and Brandon live in Scottsdale in one of those sprawling 2-story houses with a pool and 4 bedrooms. Meanwhile, I'm in my modest, single-story place on East Camelback Road. The contrast isn't lost on anyone, least of all them. Things came to a head on a warm evening in March. Danielle had insisted on a family dinner at Dominic's Steakhouse, one of those upscale places where the waiters whisper and the prices make you wince. "It'll be nice, Dad," she'd said on the phone. "Just family." What she didn't mention was that Dennis and Lisa would be there too, turning it into some kind of performance. I arrived first, naturally. Accountants are punctual. It's in the DNA. The restaurant had that dim, sophisticated lighting that makes everyone look either mysterious or tired. At my age, I land squarely in the tired category. I sat at the reserved table, watching the other diners, wondering why I'd agreed to this. Brandon and Danielle swept in 15 minutes late, followed by Dennis and Lisa. Brandon wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Danielle had on a dress I'd never seen before. Designer, no doubt. Dennis clapped his son on the shoulder, like they were sealing a business deal. "Laverne," Dennis nodded at me. Not "good to see you" or even a handshake. Just my name, delivered like he was checking off a list. "Dennis," I replied evenly. Lisa gave me one of those tight-lipped smiles that don't reach the eyes. "How lovely you could join us." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been invited to my own daughter's dinner, yet somehow I was the guest they were graciously allowing to attend. Dinner progressed with painful predictability. Brandon dominated the conversation, talking about his latest sales numbers, dropping names of clients who'd bought luxury cars. Dennis hung on every word, interjecting with business wisdom like some oracle of capitalism. Danielle laughed at all of Brandon's jokes, touching his arm adoringly. I might as well have been wallpaper. "Dad," Danielle turned to me during a lull, "you've been quiet." "Just enjoying the show," I said, keeping my tone light. Brandon's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't like that. "What show would that be, Laverne?" I noticed he never called me Dad or even Mr. Harper. Always Laverne, like we were colleagues he barely tolerated. "The conversation," I replied. "Very entertaining." "Well," Dennis jumped in, "Brandon's doing exceptionally well. We're very proud. He's really making something of himself." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "Unlike you," it whispered. "Unlike your mediocre accounting career, and your mediocre house, and your mediocre life." I took a sip of water. Staying hydrated keeps you calm. That's what I've learned. Then Brandon leaned back in his chair, that smirk growing wider. "You know what I've been thinking about, Laverne." I couldn't possibly guess. Success. Real success. The kind that comes from hard work and having the right role models. He glanced at his father. "Dad taught me everything about being a man. How to provide, how to lead, how to build a life worth living." Danielle nodded enthusiastically. Brandon's father has been so generous, always supporting us, always there when we need anything. That's what fathers do, Dennis said, puffing up like a peacock. They take care of their children, set them up for success. I felt something shift inside me, a coldness spreading through my chest. Brandon wasn't done. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. No offense, Laverne, but you could learn something from Dad. He's built an empire. He knows what it takes to be a real man. The table went quiet. Even the background restaurant noise seemed to fade. I looked at Brandon, really looked at him. At 37 years old, he still had the arrogance of someone who'd never truly struggled, never gone without, never learned that cruelty has consequences. Is that right? I asked softly. It's just facts, Brandon continued, emboldened by the silence. I mean, look at where you ended up. A tiny house, a pension that barely covers the bills. Meanwhile, Dad's been incredibly generous, helping us build something real. That's the difference between a man and... Brandon, Danielle whispered, but there was no real reproach in her voice. If anything, she looked mildly uncomfortable, that he was saying the quiet part out loud. What? I'm just being honest. Brandon spread his hands. You'll never be even half the man my father is, Laverne, and that's okay. Not everyone can be successful. Dennis actually chuckled. Lisa looked down at her plate. Danielle said nothing. I set down my water glass very carefully, stood up slowly. Every eye at the table turned to me. You know what, Brandon? You're absolutely right. His smirk widened. Your father should be the one taking care of you. So from now on, that's exactly what's going to happen. I looked directly at Brandon, then at Danielle. Let Dennis pay your bills. I'm done helping. The smirk faltered, just for a second. Danielle's face went white. Oh, what are you talking about? You've never given us anything. The words hit me like a physical blow. 8 years of sacrifice, and this was what I got. I pulled out my wallet, dropped 3 20s on the table for my portion of the meal. We hadn't even finished. Enjoy your dinner. Dad, wait, Danielle started, but I was already walking away, my heart pounding, hands shaking with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Rage, betrayal, relief. Behind me, I heard Brandon's voice. What the hell was that about? And Dennis, ignore him, probably senile. Their laughter followed me out into the parking lot. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before starting the engine, staring at the steering wheel, replaying Danielle's words. You've never given us anything. Oh, sweetheart, I thought, you have no idea what's coming. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every stoplight gave me time to think, to remember, to hurt. Phoenix at night has this quality. The city lights spread out like scattered stars, beautiful and distant, kind of like my relationship with my daughter. When I got home, I didn't turn on many lights, just walked straight to my study, a small room I'd converted from the second bedroom. This is where I keep my life organized. File cabinets, desk, computer, and most importantly, the safe. I knelt down, entered the combination I'd memorized decades ago, and pulled open the heavy door. Inside, among the important documents and a few family heirlooms, sat a thick manila folder. I'd been adding to it for 8 years. I carried it to my desk, turned on the lamp, and opened it. The first document was dated 8 years ago, a bank transfer for $3,200 to Dennis Mitchell's account. Below that, another transfer, and another. Page after page of them, each one meticulously recorded in my accountant's handwriting. Wire transfers, check copies, receipts, $847,000. I'd given them $847,000 over 8 years, and my daughter just looked me in the eye and said I'd never given them anything. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers. Here was the mortgage payment, $3,200 every single month for 96 months. There were the car payments, $890 monthly for 2 vehicles. The daycare costs for my grandchildren, Emma and Joshua, $1,400 a month. Medical insurance, $650 monthly. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of it all. The memory came unbidden, sharp and clear as yesterday. 8 years ago, Danielle had come to me 3 months after the wedding. She and Brandon were in my living room, sitting on the couch that had been there since her childhood. She'd looked nervous, twisting her hands together. Dad, we need to talk about something. Brandon had that same smirk even then, though less polished. We're looking at houses and we found the perfect one in Scottsdale, but the down payment is steep. I'd known what was coming. How much? 60,000, Danielle had said quietly. I know it's a lot, but Dad, it's our dream house, and Brandon's father said he'd help us, but you'd prefer your own father to help, I'd finished. She'd looked at me with those eyes, the same eyes that used to look at me with pure love when she was 7. Please, Dad, I'd wanted to say yes immediately, but something had stopped me. Maybe it was the way Brandon sat there, expectant, entitled. Maybe it was the whisper of intuition that I should have listened to more carefully. I'll help, I'd said, but on one condition. Brandon had leaned forward. What? I want this to be between us. Private. I don't want anyone else knowing. Why? Danielle had asked. Because I wanted to see if you'd still love me without the money being visible, I should have said. Because I wanted to know if you'd appreciate it, even when no one else could see your father helping. Because I needed to know if I mattered beyond my bank account. Instead, I'd said, I'm a private person, always have been. Is that acceptable? They'd agreed. Of course they'd agreed. And I'd set up the arrangement with Dennis Mitchell, a man who was happy to play middleman, if it meant looking like the generous father-in-law. He'd signed documents stating he was repaying an old debt to me and would pass the money to his son as gifts. It was all legal, all documented, all perfectly designed to keep me invisible. The irony was exquisite. I'd made myself invisible, and now I'd become invisible to my daughter. I remembered another moment, clearer still. Danielle's 32nd birthday, 2 years ago. I'd taken her to lunch, just the two of us, a rare occurrence by then. We'd sat at a cafe in downtown Phoenix, and she'd been checking her phone constantly. Sorry, Dad. Brandon's texting about the new car we're looking at. His father's being so generous with the down payment. My down payment. My money, funneled through Dennis, allowing him to play the benevolent patriarch. I'd smiled and nodded and said nothing. You know, she'd continued, I sometimes wish you'd been more successful. Like Dennis. He really knows how to provide for family. The words had stung then. Now, sitting in my study at night, they burned like acid. I closed the folder and stared at the wall. When had it gone so wrong? When had my kind, laughing daughter become this cold stranger who looked at me with barely concealed disappointment? The answer was simple. Gradually, then suddenly. Each month of secret payments. Each time Brandon compared me unfavorably to his father. Each moment, Danielle failed to question how they afforded their lifestyle on Brandon's moderate salary. The lies had accumulated like interest, compounding until the truth was buried under 8 years of deception. My deception. I'd created this situation, but they'd exploited it, taken it for granted, turned it into a weapon against me. I thought about Emma and Joshua, my grandchildren, 6 and 4 years old. They barely knew me. Danielle kept them busy with activities I'd been paying for, soccer lessons, art classes, that expensive daycare, all funded by the grandfather they saw maybe once a month. The rage that had simmered at dinner began to crystallize into something else, something colder and more focused. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Lists are soothing when you're an accountant. They impose order on chaos. Item 1. Stop all payments immediately. Item 2. Document everything. Item 3. Prepare for their reaction. Item 4. Let them learn what they've taken for granted. The next morning arrived with that clear Arizona sunshine that makes everything look possible. I'd barely slept, but my mind was sharp, caffeinated, and focused. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd saved years ago but never used. Anderson Legal Group. How may I direct your call? Patrick Anderson, please. Tell him Laverne Harper is calling about a financial matter. 2 days. In 2 days, I'd meet with an attorney and start dismantling the comfortable lie my daughter and her husband had been living. They thought Dennis Mitchell was their benefactor? Fine. Let's see how generous he really is when the money stops flowing. I looked at the folder one more time before locking it back in the safe. $847,000, 8 years of sacrifice, one humiliating dinner. Danielle was right about one thing. I'd never be the man Dennis Mitchell was. I'd be something far more dangerous, a patient man who'd finally run out of patience. The pieces were already in motion. Brandon and Danielle just didn't know it yet. Neither did Dennis, for that matter. But they would. Soon enough, they'd all learn that the quiet, unsuccessful father they'd dismissed had been the foundation their entire comfortable life was built on. And foundations, when removed, tend to make everything above them collapse. I smiled for the first time since dinner. Not a happy smile. The kind of smile you get when you've spent decades balancing books and finally found where all the errors were hiding. Time to reconcile the accounts. 2 mornings later, I sat in the reception area of Anderson Legal Group on the 5th floor of a sleek downtown Phoenix building, the kind of place with glass walls and leather furniture that whispers success rather than shouting it. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, old habits from a lifetime of punctuality. My phone buzzed, a text from Danielle. "Dad, can we talk? I think there was a misunderstanding at dinner." A misunderstanding? That's what she called it. As if Brandon's contempt and her casual dismissal of 8 years of sacrifice were simple miscommunication. I didn't respond. Let her wonder. "Mr. Harper?" A young receptionist smiled at me. "Mr. Anderson will see you now." Patrick Anderson's office matched the rest of the building, modern, efficient, expensive. The man himself was in his early 50s, graying at the temples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He stood and offered his hand. "Mr. Harper, please have a seat." I settled into the chair across from his desk and pulled out the manila folder. "I need legal advice on a financial matter." "Of course." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "What kind of financial matter?" "The kind involving $847,000 and family members who think I'm an unsuccessful failure." That got his attention. His eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm listening." For the next hour, I walked him through everything. The initial arrangement 8 years ago. The contract with Dennis Mitchell, technically legitimate, structured as repayment of a debt that had never actually existed. The monthly transfers. The meticulous records I'd kept of every single transaction. Patrick's expression shifted from professional interest to something like fascination as I laid out document after document. Bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, copies of checks, detailed spreadsheets showing where every dollar had gone. "You documented everything," he said, not quite a question. "I'm an accountant. It's what we do." He picked up one of the statements, studying it. "And Dennis Mitchell signed acknowledging these were debt repayments that he would pass to his son?" "Every month for 8 years, all notarized. Remarkable." Patrick set down the paper and looked at me with what might have been respect. "Mr. Harper, I have to ask. Why keep it secret? Why not let your daughter know you were helping?" The question I'd been asking myself for days, because I wanted to know if they'd still value me without seeing the money. Turns out I got my answer. He nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now I want to stop all payments. Legally, cleanly, with documentation proving I have every right to do so, and I want to be prepared if they challenge it." Patrick was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled, a small, professional smile that told me he understood exactly what I was doing. "Here's what we'll do," he began. We spent another 2 hours crafting the strategy. First, a formal promissory note cancellation, a legal document declaring the debt fully repaid and terminating all future obligations. Second, a comprehensive financial statement documenting every payment, properly notarized and filed. Third, letters to the relevant institutions, the bank holding the mortgage, the auto loan companies, informing them that L. Harper would no longer be making payments on behalf of the account holders. "They'll start receiving late payment notices within weeks," Patrick said, "maybe sooner." "Good. You understand this will create significant financial hardship for your daughter and son-in-law." I thought about Brandon's smirk, Dennis's condescending chuckle, Danielle's shocked face when she denied I'd ever helped them. They have jobs. They can figure it out like adults. Patrick nodded and made some notes. "I'll have the documents ready by the end of the week. You'll need to come in to sign, and we'll need Dennis Mitchell's signature on the cancellation acknowledgement. He'll sign, trust me." Because Dennis would sign anything that made him look cooperative. He'd built his entire relationship with his son on the illusion of generosity. Admitting he'd been passing along my money would destroy that carefully constructed image. As I stood to leave, Patrick extended his hand again. "Mr. Harper, if I may say so, this is one of the more interesting cases I've handled. Most people in your position would just be angry. You're being strategic." "Anger is expensive," I replied. "Strategy pays dividends." 3 days later, I sat across from another professional in another office. This one was smaller, located in a strip mall off Indian School Road, with significantly less marble and leather. But Lorraine Castillo came highly recommended by Patrick's firm, and her website showed an impressive track record. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, dressed practically in dark jeans and a blazer, the kind of person who blended into crowds, useful in her line of work. "Private investigation," she said, reviewing the notes she'd taken during my explanation. "You want detailed financial information on your daughter and son-in-law, current debts, spending patterns, income sources, credit card usage, everything that's legally obtainable. It's all public record if you know where to look. Credit reports, property records, court filings, business licenses." She tapped her pen against the notepad. "May I ask why?" "Because I want to know exactly what house of cards I'm about to stop supporting." Lorraine studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. I'll need a retainer of $1,500. My rate is $150 an hour, and this kind of work usually takes about 20 hours total. I'll have a preliminary report to you within 2 weeks." I wrote the check without hesitation. $1,500 was less than a single month's worth of the payments I'd been making. Money well spent. "One more thing," I added. "Discretion is essential. They can't know they're being investigated. Mr. Harper, if they knew I was investigating them, I wouldn't be very good at my job." She smiled slightly. "You'll have your answers soon." Over the next week, I methodically executed the plan. On a Tuesday morning, I made the final mortgage payment, $3,200 transferred to the bank that held the note on that beautiful Scottsdale house. On Thursday, the last auto loan payments, $890 split between 2 luxury vehicles. Brandon and Danielle absolutely couldn't afford on their own. The following week, I paid the final daycare bill, $1,400 to keep Emma and Joshua in their expensive preschool with the organic meals and the foreign language instruction. Each payment felt different now, not like an expression of love, but like closing accounts, balancing the books one final time. The letter to Dennis Mitchell went out on a Friday afternoon, sent via certified mail so I'd have proof he received it. Professional, cordial, absolutely final. "Dear Dennis, as of this date, the financial arrangement between us regarding debt repayment is concluded. All obligations have been satisfied in full. No further transfers will be made. Thank you for your cooperation over the past 8 years. Regards, Laverne Harper." He'd read between those lines. He'd understand, and he'd panic. The thought made me smile as I dropped the envelope in the mailbox. My phone rang that evening. Danielle. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. The next morning she tried again. This time she left a message. "Dad, I'm worried about you. You seemed upset at dinner. Can we please talk? I love you. I love you." 3 words that used to mean everything. Now they just sounded hollow. I still didn't call back. Instead, I sat in my study, reorganizing the documentation, creating copies, filing everything in labeled folders with that precise accountant's care that had defined my professional life. But this wasn't about business anymore. This was personal, and I was going to handle it with the same methodical attention to detail that had made me successful for 38 years. Patrick called midweek. "Documents are ready. Dennis Mitchell signed the cancellation acknowledgement yesterday. Seemed nervous, asked a lot of questions about confidentiality." "I bet he did." "Everything's filed and notarized. As of now, you have 0 legal obligation to continue any payments. You're free and clear." Free and clear. Strange how those words could sound so much like revenge. I picked up one of my antique watches from the collection on my desk, a 1940s Omega, perfectly maintained, still keeping perfect time after 8 decades. Reliable, precise, built to last, unlike the relationships I'd been funding. The watch ticked steadily in my hand, marking seconds that turned into minutes, that turned into the dismantling of my daughter's comfortable illusions, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clear purpose. The first notification arrived at Danielle and Brandon's house on a Tuesday morning in early April. I know because Lorraine Castillo included it in her preliminary report, which landed in my email inbox that same afternoon. I opened the PDF at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside me as I read through 23 pages of detailed financial investigation. The picture it painted was worse than I'd imagined. Brandon and Danielle weren't just living beyond their means, they were drowning in debt I'd known nothing about. $47,000 across 6 credit cards, $12,000 on a furniture loan for that designer living room set, $8,500 owed to a private school for some enrichment program I'd never heard of. Their combined income, Brandon's auto dealership salary, and Danielle's part-time work at a boutique, came to roughly $98,000 annually before taxes. Respectable, even comfortable in many parts of the country. But their expenses told a different story. The mortgage I'd been paying, the car payments, daycare, insurance, plus gym memberships, housekeeping services, lawn care, grocery deliveries, subscription boxes, restaurant meals that averaged $600 monthly. They'd been spending nearly $12,000 every month while earning less than $6,000 after taxes and my invisible support. The math was staggering. Without my contributions, they had a deficit of roughly $4,000 monthly. And that was before any of the credit card minimums. No wonder they hadn't questioned their lifestyle. They'd never actually had to pay for it. Lorraine's report included photographs, time-stamped images of Brandon's BMW in the driveway, shots of Danielle's Mercedes, pictures of the house with its manicured lawn and decorative fountain. She'd even documented a shopping trip where Danielle had spent $1,100 at Nordstrom in a single afternoon. All of it funded by the father she'd claimed never gave them anything. I sat back, staring at the numbers on the screen. Part of me felt vindicated. Here was proof of exactly what I'd suspected. But another part, the part that remembered a 7-year-old with pigtails, felt something uncomfortably close to grief. When had she become this person? My phone buzzed. Danielle calling again. Third time this week. This time I answered. "Dad! Finally!" Relief flooded her voice. "I've been trying to reach you." "I've been busy." "Too busy to call your daughter back." A edge crept into her tone. "Look, about the dinner. Brandon was out of line. He shouldn't have said those things." Notice she didn't say she was out of line. Didn't apologize for her own words. "Is that why you called?" I asked. "To tell me Brandon was rude?" "No, She paused. "Actually, I wanted to ask for a small favor. We're having some cash flow issues, and I was hoping you could help with a few bills, just until Brandon's commission check comes in." There it was. Not an apology. A request for money. "What kind of bills?" "Just the usual stuff. Mortgage is due, and there's been some confusion with the payment. I think there might be an error at the bank." "No error, Danielle. Just reality catching up with you." "Have you talked to Dennis about it? Brandon's father is quite successful after all. I'm sure he'd be happy to help." Silence on the other end. Then, "Dad, why are you being like this?" "Like what?" "Cold, distant." "You're acting like I did something wrong." The audacity was almost impressive. "Did you ever wonder how you could afford that house, Danielle? On Brandon's salary?" "What? Brandon's father helps us sometimes, you know that. And we work hard." "Right. Dennis helps you, of course." I kept my voice level, almost conversational. "Tell me, when's the last time you asked how I was doing? Not asked for something, just asked." Another pause, longer this time. "That's not fair, isn't it? Dad, if you're mad about dinner, just say so. But don't punish us financially because Brandon said something stupid while he was drinking." Punish them. As if withdrawing support I'd never been acknowledged for was somehow an attack. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said calmly. "I'm simply not helping anymore. There's a difference." "What does that even mean? You never helped in the first place." Frustration sharpened her words. "Unless you've been secretly paying our bills or something ridiculous like that." I almost laughed, almost told her right then. But the timing wasn't right. "Talk to Dennis," I said instead. "I'm sure he'll take care of you." I hung up before she could respond. 4 days later, Lorraine sent an update. Brandon had called his father Dennis in a panic. The bank had sent a notice about the mortgage. Payment was 15 days overdue. The auto loan company had called about both car payments. Dennis, according to Lorraine's surveillance notes, had looked confused during the conversation. The dominoes were starting to fall. I met with Patrick again at his office to review the legal documentation. Everything was in order, every signature properly notarized, every form filed correctly. If Danielle or Brandon tried to claim I owed them continued support, we had 8 years of documentation proving the payments had been voluntary, routed through Dennis with no legal obligation on my part. They might get angry, Patrick warned. They're already angry. They just don't know who to be angry at yet. He smiled at that. You've thought this through. I've had 8 years to think it through. The confrontation I'd been expecting came on a Saturday afternoon. I was in my greenhouse, tending to my cacti collection, those patient, thorny survivors that thrived in harsh conditions, when I heard car doors slam in my driveway. Through the window, I watched Brandon and Danielle march up to my front door. Brandon's face was flushed, his jaw set. Danielle looked like she'd been crying. I took my time washing the soil from my hands, letting them knock twice before I opened the door. We need to talk, Brandon said, pushing past me into my house without invitation. Danielle followed, looking uncomfortable but not stopping her husband. Dad, what's going on? Our mortgage payment bounced. Both car payments bounced. The daycare called, saying we're overdue. I told you to talk to Dennis. I closed the door calmly. Dad's confused. Brandon's voice rose. He says he hasn't been helping us. Says you were sending him money for some old debt. But that's stopped now. None of this makes sense. I walked to my study, pulled out a folder, not the main documentation, just a summary, and handed it to Brandon. It makes perfect sense when you actually look at the numbers. He opened it, scanning the first page. His expression shifted from anger to confusion to something like shock. What is this? Bank statements, showing transfers from my account to Dennis's account, monthly for 8 years, totaling $847,000. Danielle's face went pale. This can't be. It's all documented, notarized, legal. I kept my voice steady. Dennis was passing the money to you as gifts from Dad. My money, his credit. You're lying, Brandon said, but his voice had lost its conviction. Call him. Ask him to explain where those deposits came from every month. Danielle sat down heavily on my couch. Why would you do that? Why not just give it to us directly? Finally, the right question. Because I wanted to see if you'd still love me without seeing the money, if you'd still value your father even when you thought he was unsuccessful. I looked at her directly. I got my answer at that dinner. Dad, her voice cracked, you called me a failure, Danielle. You stood by while your husband compared me to Dennis and found me lacking. You had no idea that every success you attributed to Dennis's generosity was actually funded by the father you'd dismissed as not good enough. Brandon was still staring at the statements. This is insane. You can't just stop paying our bills. They're not my bills. They're yours. You're both adults with jobs. Time to act like it. We have children. Brandon's face reddened again. What about Emma and Joshua? What about them? Will you feed them less if you have to actually budget? Or will you just buy fewer designer handbags and eat out less frequently? I pulled out another sheet, the spending analysis from Lorraine's report. $600 a month on restaurants, $1,100 on a shopping trip last Tuesday, 2 gym memberships you never use. This isn't about your children. This is about your lifestyle. Danielle was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. Brandon looked like he wanted to hit something. You manipulative old... Brandon started. Careful, I interrupted. You're in my house, and unlike you, I actually pay for it myself. They left 20 minutes later, Brandon practically vibrating with rage, Danielle silent and pale. I watched them drive away in one of those expensive cars I'd been financing. Not anymore. That evening my phone rang. Dennis Mitchell. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. What the hell kind of game are you playing? His voice had lost all its smooth confidence. Brandon's accusing me of lying to him. The bank is calling about missed payments. Check your bank statements, Dennis. 8 years of deposits from me to you. Remember signing those receipts? Those notarized documents acknowledging you were receiving debt repayment? You told me it was legitimate debt repayment. It was legitimate documentation of funds you agreed to pass to your son. All legal, all properly recorded. And now, all finished. I paused. How does it feel, Dennis? Being the generous father on someone else's dime? He sputtered, searching for words. You have two choices, I continued calmly. You can explain to your son that you've been taking credit for my money for 8 years. Or you can start actually being the generous father you've been pretending to be. Either way, I'm done. I hung up before he could respond. Standing in my study, surrounded by my documentation and my antique watches, and the evidence of 8 years of invisible sacrifice, I felt something shift, the last piece of doubt falling away. They'd made their choice when they humiliated me at that dinner. Now I was making mine, and that's when I understood exactly how to show them what they'd taken for granted. Not through anger or confrontation, but through the simple, devastating power of consequences. The plan was already in motion. I just needed to let it play out. The consequences arrived faster than I'd anticipated. Early one morning in May, Lorraine sent me an email with a single-line subject. Foreclosure notice delivered. Attached was a photo she'd taken from across the street, the official envelope from the bank, tucked into Danielle and Brandon's mailbox. 90 days. That's how long they had before the bank could legally take the house. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, studying the photo. Part of me, the part that remembered teaching Danielle to ride a bike, who'd held her hand on her first day of school, felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered her face at that dinner, the casual cruelty in her voice when she said I'd never given them anything. The guilt evaporated like morning dew in Arizona heat. 3 days later, Lorraine's next update came through. I was in my greenhouse, carefully watering my cacti, when my phone buzzed. The message contained a video file. I pressed play. The footage showed Danielle and Brandon's driveway. A tow truck was backing up to the BMW X5, the car I'd been making payments on for the past 5 years. 2 men in company uniforms were attaching chains to the wheels, while Brandon stood on his front lawn, gesturing wildly, his face red even in the grainy video. Danielle emerged from the house, running toward the truck. Even without audio, I could see she was crying. The repo men ignored her, efficiently loading the vehicle onto the flatbed. Brandon pulled out his phone, probably calling his father or maybe the finance company. Not that it would matter. The BMW was gone in less than 10 minutes. I watched the video twice. The second time I noticed little Emma standing in the doorway, her small hand pressed against the glass, watching her parents panic with confused eyes. That hit harder than I'd expected. Emma and Joshua, 6 and 4 years old, they were innocent in all this. But their parents had created this situation, not me. Sometimes the hardest lessons come with the highest cost. Lorraine's updated report arrived that same afternoon. 23 pages of financial devastation. The credit card debt I'd known about, $47,000, had been joined by new maxed-out cards they'd opened, desperately trying to cover expenses. Brandon's Mercedes would be next for repossession. He was already 3 payments behind. The foreclosure notice was official. The daycare had stopped accepting Emma and Joshua after 2 months of non-payment. But the detail that struck me most was this. They'd tried to borrow money from 6 different friends. All 6 had declined. One had even told them bluntly that they needed to learn to live within their means. Their carefully constructed social circle was already backing away. The cracks were showing, and people in their world didn't want to be near when the structure finally collapsed. A week and a half after the car repossession, my phone rang. Dennis Mitchell. I considered not answering, but I wanted to hear what he'd say now that reality was setting in. Laverne, his voice had lost its usual pompous confidence. We need to talk. I'm listening. I checked the bank statements, all of them. 8 years of deposits from you to me, just like you said. Surprised? He paused. I didn't realize the scale. When you approached me 8 years ago with that debt repayment arrangement, you said it was a personal matter. You thought what, Dennis? That you could take credit for being the generous father without asking where all that generosity was actually coming from? Silence. Then, why did you do it this way? It was a fair question, actually, because I wanted to know if my daughter would still love me when she thought I had nothing to offer. You helped me find out the answer. Brandon's falling apart. He's terrified they'll lose the house. Then maybe Dennis Mitchell, the successful businessman, should help his son. Isn't that what you've been claiming to do all these years? More silence. I could practically hear him calculating, trying to find a way out of this that didn't destroy his reputation or drain his actual resources. I can't cover everything they owe, he finally admitted. The business isn't. I'm not as liquid as people think. Of course he wasn't. Dennis's furniture business was profitable, but not spectacularly so. His own lifestyle was carefully managed to look more successful than it was. He'd been riding my coattails as much as Brandon had. That sounds like a problem for you and your son to work out, I said calmly. You're really going to let them lose everything? I'm not letting them do anything. They're adults who made choices. They're simply experiencing the natural consequences of those choices. What about Emma and Joshua? That question again. Everyone's suddenly concerned about the children. What about them? Will they starve? No. Will they have a roof over their heads? Yes, even if it's smaller. Will they still have parents who love them? I hope so. What they won't have is a lifestyle their parents can't actually afford. That's called reality, Dennis. He hung up without another word. 2 days later, Danielle called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 3 minutes of alternating between tears and anger. Dad, how can you do this to us? To your grandchildren? We're about to lose everything. Brandon says it's your fault that you stopped helping Dennis, and now he can't help us either. I don't understand what's happening. Just call me back, please. We need you. We need you. Not, I love you, or I'm sorry for what I said at dinner. Just, we need you. More specifically, they needed my money. I deleted the message. The following week brought another call from Danielle. This time when I answered, her voice was different, harder, sharper. You're really not going to help us? That's correct. After everything, after all the holidays we spent together, all the times you saw the kids, all the times I paid your mortgage, your car loans, your daycare bills, I interrupted. Yes, Danielle, after all that. You're a cruel old man. Her voice shook with rage. You want to know something? You won't see Emma and Joshua again, not until you apologize and fix this mess you've created. The threat landed like she'd intended it to, a direct hit to the one thing she knew I cared about, my grandchildren. That's your choice to make, I said, keeping my voice level, despite the pain in my chest. But understand something, Danielle. I didn't create this mess. You and Brandon did when you built a life you couldn't afford, and then mocked the person who was making it possible. We didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. She was crying now, angry tears. I hate you. Right now, probably, but someday you might understand why this had to happen. I will never forgive you for this. Never. She hung up. I sat in my study for a long time after that call, staring at the framed photo on my desk, Danielle at 7 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing she'd made for me. Best daddy ever, written in crayon. When had everything gone so wrong? But I knew the answer. It had gone wrong gradually, one secret payment at a time, one instance of taking credit for my sacrifice at a time, one dismissive comment at a time. I'd built this situation as much as they had. The difference was I was going to end it. Lorraine's next report included surveillance photos from outside their house. Friends had stopped visiting. The lawn service had been canceled. I could see the grass growing longer. Brandon's remaining car, the Mercedes, had a parking ticket on the windshield. Small signs of a life unraveling. The bank had officially initiated foreclosure proceedings. They had until mid-August to vacate. Everything was falling apart, exactly as the natural laws of finance dictated it should. And through it all, I simply watched, documented, and waited. Because the real revelation, the moment when everyone would understand exactly what had happened, that was still to come. The first week of June brought a heat wave that turned Phoenix into an oven. Appropriate, I thought, given that Danielle and Brandon's world was burning down around them. I met with Patrick Anderson at his office to review the final documentation. He'd prepared what he called a comprehensive disclosure package. Every financial transaction, every contract, every piece of evidence organized into a thick binder with tabs and highlighted sections. This is remarkable work, Patrick said, flipping through the pages. Everything documented, cross-referenced, notarized. I've never seen such thorough record-keeping from a non-lawyer. 38 years as an accountant teaches you the value of documentation. He pulled out a specific document, the sworn affidavit he'd prepared. This statement, when signed under oath, will legally establish the entire arrangement, Dennis Mitchell's involvement, the payment structure, the voluntary nature of your support, everything. And if Danielle or Brandon try to claim I owed them continued support, they have no legal standing. You voluntarily helped through a third party. You can stop anytime. They're not dependents, they're adults with their own incomes. He smiled slightly. Frankly, if they did try to sue, they'd only publicize their own financial irresponsibility. Perfect. Everything legally airtight, just like I'd planned. The next surveillance report from Lorraine arrived that evening. I read it while eating dinner. A simple meal, nothing fancy. Just me, my modest pension, and the satisfaction of watching karma work its magic. According to Lorraine's observations, Danielle and Brandon had tried to borrow from 3 more friends. All refused. They'd visited a pawn shop and sold several pieces of jewelry, including Danielle's wedding ring upgrade that I'd unknowingly funded 2 years ago. They'd received $1,200 for items worth at least $5,000. Desperation makes people accept bad deals. The foreclosure process had officially begun. The bank had posted legal notices. The clock was ticking. A week later, Lorraine sent photos that made me set down my coffee cup carefully to avoid spilling it. Brandon, dressed in a cheap suit, walking into a smaller auto dealership across town. Not the upscale place where he'd worked before, but a buy here, pay here lot that sold to people with bad credit. The kind of place that was a significant step down in the industry. The caption read, "New employment, confirmed with manager. Salary approximately 40% less than previous position." So Brandon had lost his job at the luxury dealership. Stress and customer complaints, probably. Difficult to sell cars with a smile when your life is imploding. And now he was working somewhere he'd previously looked down on. The universe had a sense of irony. 3 days after that, the report I'd been waiting for arrived. Dennis Mitchell had finally done what I'd suggested weeks ago. He'd thoroughly reviewed 8 years of bank statements. According to Lorraine's source, she had impressive contacts, Dennis had spent an entire Saturday locked in his home office, going through every transaction. She'd included a photo taken through his window. Dennis at his desk, head in his hands, surrounded by paper. The posture of a man realizing he'd been played. That evening my phone rang. Dennis again. "I went through everything," he said without preamble. "Every single deposit from you. Every transfer to Brandon." I added it up, Laverne. $847,000. Sounds right. My records show $847,182 to be precise. Why? His voice cracked slightly. Why let me take credit for your money? I needed someone to pass it through. You were willing. You got to play the generous father. I stayed invisible. It worked for both of us. Until now. Until my daughter and your son decided to humiliate me at a family dinner. I kept my tone conversational. That changed things. Brandon doesn't understand. He keeps asking why I stopped helping. I don't know what to tell him. Tell him the truth, Dennis. Tell him every penny he thought came from his successful father actually came from the grandfather he mocked as a failure. He'll never forgive me? Then you'll understand how I felt when Danielle said I'd never given them anything. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Dennis spoke again, quieter now. What do you want from me? Nothing. You've already served your purpose. The question is, what will you do now? Will you actually help your son, or was the generous father act only sustainable when you were using my money? I could hear him breathing, thinking. I offered him $15,000. It's all I can spare without jeopardizing my own business. $15,000 against how much in total debt? Based on what he told me, close to $90,000. The math was brutal and simple. Dennis's offer was barely 16% of what they owed. A gesture, nothing more. Then I guess Brandon will learn what his actual support system looks like, I said. Welcome to reality, Dennis. He hung up without another word. The final call came late one evening at the end of June. Danielle. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Dad. Her voice was small, defeated. Nothing like the angry woman who'd threatened to cut off my access to the grandchildren. Danielle. We're losing the house. It's official. We have to be out by mid-August. I heard. You heard? How? She paused, maybe realizing that I'd been more informed than she thought. Dad, please, I'm begging you. We need help. Brandon lost his job. We can't cover the debt. We can't. Ask Dennis. He gave us 15,000. That's nothing. We owe. She stopped, probably realizing she was about to reveal the full extent of their financial disaster. You owe what, Danielle? More than that, she said quietly. A lot more. How much more? 90,000, give or take. Her voice was barely a whisper. Credit cards, the furniture loan, back payments on everything. I let the silence hang for a moment. Let her feel the weight of that number. That's a significant amount of debt, I finally said. How did it get that high? We thought, she started crying. We thought we had more money than we did. Brandon's father was helping, or we thought he was, and I had my boutique income, and Brandon was making good commissions. But you were spending 12,000 a month while earning 6. How do you know that? Because I'm an accountant, Danielle. I know how to look at numbers. The question is, why didn't you? She sobbed quietly on the other end. Will you help us? Why would I do that? Because I'm your daughter. The desperation in her voice was raw. Because Emma and Joshua are your grandchildren. Because family helps family. Family, I repeated slowly. Is that what we are? Because at that dinner, you stood by while your husband called me a failure. You told me I'd never given you anything. That doesn't sound like family to me. I didn't know. Didn't know what? That I'd been paying your bills? That every success you attributed to Dennis's generosity was actually funded by the father you looked down on? The silence that followed told me she still didn't fully understand, still didn't know the complete truth. Good. That revelation was coming. But not yet. Find somewhere cheaper to live, I said finally. Get jobs that pay the bills. Learn to budget. Be adults. That's it? That's all you have to say? That's all the advice you're getting from me. What you do with it is up to you. I meant what I said before, she whispered. You won't see Emma and Joshua again, not until you fix this. The threat still hurt, but less than before. That's your choice, Danielle. But remember, you're the one choosing to keep their grandfather away, not me. I hung up before she could respond. Sitting in my study that night, I pulled out the large brown folder I'd been building, the complete record of 8 years. Bank statements, contracts, receipts, photographs, surveillance reports, legal affidavits, everything I needed to show them, to show everyone exactly what had happened. Patrick had prepared the final document, a notarized statement detailing every transaction, every payment, every penny of that $847,000. Where it went, how it was used, who knew about it. The truth, comprehensive and undeniable. I wasn't ready to reveal it yet, but soon. Very soon, everyone would know exactly what Danielle and Brandon had taken for granted, what Dennis had used to inflate his own image, what I had sacrificed in silence. The forecast for early July showed clear skies and temperatures over 100 degrees. Perfect weather for a barbecue, and perfect weather for the truth to finally burn away 8 years of comfortable lies. Independence Day arrived with cloudless Arizona skies and temperatures that would crack 100 by noon. Appropriate, I thought, for what was about to become my own Declaration of Independence. I hadn't been invited to the Mitchell family barbecue. That was fine. I'd invited myself. The brown folder sat on my passenger seat as I drove toward Dennis and Lisa's house in their upscale Phoenix neighborhood. 8 years of documentation, organized with an accountant's precision. Every bank statement, every transfer confirmation, every notarized receipt. The complete story of how I'd funded my daughter's lifestyle while being dismissed as a failure. I'd timed my arrival for mid-afternoon when everyone would be gathered and comfortable. Maximum audience for maximum impact. The driveway was already crowded with cars when I pulled up. Brandon's remaining Mercedes. A few vehicles I didn't recognize. Probably Dennis's siblings and their families. The backyard was visible through the side gate, smoke rising from the grill, the sound of conversation and laughter carrying over the fence. I grabbed the folder and walked around to the back gate. Didn't knock, didn't announce myself, just opened it and stepped through. The party froze in stages. First, Dennis's sister Carol noticed me, her smile fading into confusion. Then Lisa, who'd been arranging plates, looked up and went pale. Dennis turned from the grill, spatula in hand, his expression shifting from surprise to something like dread. Danielle sat at the patio table with Emma on her lap, mid-sentence in what I could tell was a complaint. And he just abandoned us, his own daughter and grandchildren, like we mean nothing. She saw me, stopped talking. Her face went through a fascinating progression. Shock, fear, anger, all in about 3 seconds. Brandon was the last to notice, standing near the pool with a beer in hand. When he spotted me, his entire body tensed. "What are you doing here?" "Family gathering," I said calmly, walking toward the main table where everyone had congregated. "I'm family, aren't I?" "You weren't invited," Lisa said, her voice thin. "No, I wasn't. But I have something important to share with everyone." I set the brown folder on the table with a soft thud. "The truth." Brandon took a step forward. "You need to leave. Now." "Sit down, Brandon," I said, not looking at him. I opened the folder and began pulling out documents. "Unless you'd prefer I have this conversation without you." Dennis set down his spatula. "Laverne, maybe this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time, Dennis. Everyone's here. Everyone who's been wondering why Danielle and Brandon are losing their house. Everyone who's heard them blame their cruel father." I spread the first set of papers across the table. "Let me show you what really happened." The bank statements were on top, 8 years of transfers highlighted in yellow. I'd prepared copies for this exact moment. "These are transfers from my account to Dennis Mitchell's account, monthly for 8 years. Would anyone like to guess the total?" Silence. Carol leaned forward, squinting at the numbers. $847,182. I let that number hang in the air. "Approximately $106,000 per year." Lisa's hand went to her chest. "That can't be." "It's all documented, notarized, legal." I pulled out the contract Dennis had signed. Dennis agreed to receive these funds as debt repayment and transfer them to Brandon as gifts. Here's his signature, acknowledging every transaction. Dennis's face had gone from its usual ruddy complexion to an unhealthy gray. "Laverne, please." "Please what?" "Please don't tell everyone that the generous father they've been praising was actually just a middleman for my money." I laid out the detailed breakdown. Next. Mortgage payments on the Scottsdale house. $3,200 monthly for 8 years. Total, $307,200. I placed another sheet. 2 car payments, $890 monthly. Total, $85,440. Danielle was crying now, silent tears running down her face. Emma looked up at her mother, confused. "Daycare for Emma and Joshua at that expensive facility. $1,400 monthly. Total, $134,400. Another sheet. Medical insurance, $650 monthly. Total, $62,400. Brandon's beer bottle hung forgotten in his hand. His mouth was slightly open, like a fish gasping for air. The remaining $257,000 went to various other expenses. Furniture, clothing, vacations, the pool maintenance, the lawn service. I looked around the table at the shocked faces. Everything they thought Dennis's successful business was providing? It was me. The father Danielle claimed never gave her anything. Carol spoke first. "Why would you do it this way? Why not just help them directly?" "Because I wanted to see if they'd still love me when they thought I was unsuccessful. When they thought I was just a retired accountant living in a modest house." I looked directly at Danielle. "I got my answer at a dinner 4 months ago, when my son-in-law told me I'd never be half the man his father was, and my daughter stood by and said I'd never given her anything." "Dad," Danielle's voice cracked, "I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference." I pulled out the final document, the notarized affidavit. "This is a sworn statement, legally binding, detailing the entire arrangement. Dennis will confirm every word is true. Won't you, Dennis?" Dennis looked like he wanted to disappear into the concrete. Yes, it's all true." Lisa turned to her husband, her voice rising. "You knew? You knew you were giving them someone else's money, and you let me believe—" "I didn't realize the scale." Dennis's voice broke. "I thought it was a few thousand here and there, not—" He gestured helplessly at the papers. "Not this." Brandon finally found his voice. "This is insane. You're lying. You doctored these documents." Everything's notarized, Brandon. Bank statements don't lie. Mathematics don't lie. I kept my tone even, almost conversational. Your entire lifestyle for 8 years was funded by the man you mocked. Every success you attributed to your father's generosity came from your father-in-law's wallet. Why are you doing this? Danielle sobbed. Why now, in front of everyone? Because you asked me to help you at that dinner. And I did. For 8 years I helped you silently, invisibly, completely. And when I finally stopped, you threatened to keep my grandchildren from me. I looked at her, really looked at her. You needed to understand what you lost, what you threw away. And everyone here needed to understand that the cruel father you've been complaining about was actually the only reason you had that house, those cars, that life. The silence that followed was broken only by Emma's small voice. Grandpa? Why is Mommy crying? I knelt down so I was at her eye level. Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart. Big ones. When I stood, I gathered the documents back into the folder. Everything here is yours to keep, Danielle. You'll need it when you explain to people why you're moving to that apartment in Glendale. And Dennis, you'll want copies when you explain to your friends and business associates how your generosity really worked. I turned to leave, but Brandon blocked my path. You can't just... I can. I did. And it's completely legal. Ask your lawyer. I stepped around him. Enjoy your barbecue. As I walked back toward the gate, I heard the explosion of voices behind me. Lisa shouting at Dennis, Carol asking questions, Danielle crying harder. The sound of a family confronting 8 years of comfortable lies all at once. I didn't look back. The drive home felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't fully realized was there until I set it down. My phone started ringing before I even got to my street. Danielle, then Brandon, then Dennis. I ignored them all. The truth was out. Finally, completely, undeniably out. Now they could deal with it. The fallout hit harder and faster than even I'd anticipated. 2 days after the barbecue, Dennis showed up at my door. He looked like he'd aged a decade, unshaven, circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped. Lisa had apparently spent the past 48 hours alternating between furious silence and loud recriminations about his deception. Can we talk? He asked. I let him in. Didn't offer coffee. Just led him to my living room and waited. Lisa's barely speaking to me, he started. My brother, he was at the barbecue. He's been calling everyone in the family. They all think I'm some kind of fraud. You were taking credit for my money, Dennis. That's pretty close to the definition. I didn't know it was that much. I swear, Laverne. I thought you were sending maybe $1,000 a month, not... He rubbed his face. $800,000. How did you even have that kind of money? I saved. I invested wisely. I lived modestly. And I spent it on my daughter because I loved her. I kept my voice level. The question isn't how I had it. The question is why you were comfortable pretending it came from you. Because it made me look like a good father. The admission seemed to deflate him further. Brandon respected me. Lisa was proud of me. I liked being the generous patriarch. On my dime. On your dime, he agreed quietly. I'm sorry. If I'd known you were paying that much, if I'd understood, you would have what? Told Brandon the truth? Refused to participate? I studied him. Or would you have just felt more guilty while still cashing my checks? He had no answer for that. What do you want from me, Dennis? I don't know. Forgiveness? Understanding? He looked around my modest living room, so different from his showpiece home. How did you afford all this? I retired with a good pension and excellent savings. I could have had a bigger house, fancier things, but I chose to invest in my daughter's happiness instead. The irony wasn't lost on me. Turns out I was investing in the wrong thing. Dennis left 20 minutes later, no more at peace than when he'd arrived. I watched him drive away in his Mercedes, paid for by his actual business at least, and felt nothing but a mild satisfaction that the truth was eating at him. The real confrontation came later that week. Danielle had been calling daily, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I'd ignored them all. But when she showed up at my door with Emma and Joshua, I couldn't turn away the children. 10 minutes, I said. Emma and Joshua can play in the backyard with my cacti collection. You and I will talk here. The kids ran off happily, They'd always loved visiting Grandpa's desert garden. Danielle sat on my couch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I'm sorry, she began. For which part? The years of disrespect? The dinner where you let Brandon humiliate me? Claiming I never helped you? Threatening to keep my grandchildren from me? She flinched at each item. All of it. I was horrible. I became someone I don't recognize. You became someone who valued money over relationships. Someone who looked down on their own father because his house wasn't as big as yours. I sat across from her. When did that happen, Danielle? I don't know. Slowly. Brandon's friends all have money, and his parents are always talking about success and achievement, and I got caught up in it. She wiped her eyes. I stopped seeing what mattered. You stopped seeing me. I know. Her voice broke. And now we're losing everything, and I realized none of it mattered except you, and I destroyed that relationship for a lifestyle I couldn't even afford. I wanted to comfort her. Every paternal instinct I had screamed to hold my daughter and tell her it would be okay. But she needed to sit with this, needed to truly understand. Apologies are just words, Danielle. What matters is what you do next. What can I do? The house is being foreclosed. Brandon lost his job. We have $90,000 in debt. We're moving to a tiny apartment in 2 weeks. She laughed bitterly. We're getting exactly what we deserve. Maybe you are. But Emma and Joshua don't deserve parents who are drowning. They deserve parents who work hard, live honestly, and teach them that character matters more than square footage. She looked up at me. Are you saying... I'm not giving you money, I interrupted. That's done. But I'll give you advice if you want it. Help you build a real budget. Maybe watch the kids sometimes while you work. I paused. If you prove you've learned something from this. How do I prove that? Time. Consistency. Actually living within your means, instead of constantly reaching for more. I stood. Right now, you need to get your life in order. Find jobs, downsize, figure out how to survive on what you actually earn. Do that for 6 months, and we'll talk. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry it took losing everything to remember that. I love you too. That's why I let you fall. After she left with the kids, the house felt quiet. I sat in my study, looking at the empty folder that had contained all that documentation. The weight of 8 years of secrets finally lifted. My phone rang. Patrick Anderson. Just wanted to update you, he said. Brandon Mitchell apparently consulted a lawyer about suing you for emotional distress, or some such nonsense. I almost smiled. And? The lawyer apparently laughed him out of the office. You have ironclad documentation proving every payment was voluntary. There's no legal recourse. He paused. Though I should warn you, the foreclosure is proceeding. The bank will take possession of the house within 3 weeks. They'll need to be out by mid-August. I know. Are you prepared for that? Watching your daughter lose her home? I thought about it, really thought about it. Yes, because it was never really her home. It was a house I bought that she happened to live in. Now she'll find an actual home she can afford. You're remarkably calm about all this. I'm an accountant, Patrick. I understand that sometimes you have to write off a loss to save the rest of the ledger. But that night, sitting in my greenhouse among the cacti I'd nurtured for years, I wondered if I'd been too harsh. These plants survived in hostile conditions because they'd adapted, learned to thrive with less water, less everything. Maybe Danielle and Brandon could learn the same lesson, or maybe they'd wither under the pressure of reality. Either way, the truth was out. The lies had been burned away by the harsh light of disclosure. What grew from the ashes, that would tell me if there was anything worth salvaging. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Brandon, the first communication I'd had from him since the barbecue. You destroyed my family. I hope you're proud of yourself. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed my reply. I didn't destroy anything. I simply stopped building it for you. The rest was your own doing. I hit send and turned off my phone. The desert night was settling over Phoenix, temperature finally dropping from unbearable to merely uncomfortable. In the distance I could hear fireworks, late celebrants still marking Independence Day. Fitting. I declared my own independence from being the invisible foundation of someone else's illusion. Now we'd see if they could build something real on their own. August arrived with the relentless heat that makes Phoenix feel like the surface of another planet. Appropriate timing. Danielle and Brandon were about to experience life on an entirely different world than the one they'd known. I watched from a distance as they moved out of the Scottsdale house. Not physically present, I wasn't cruel enough for that, but Lorraine sent me photos. The furniture truck looked smaller than it should have. Most of the expensive pieces they'd bought on credit had been sold or repossessed. What remained fit into a modest U-Haul. The apartment in Glendale was a far cry from their former palace. 2 bedrooms, 900 square feet, in a complex with a shared laundry room. Rent was $1,400 monthly, less than they'd been paying for daycare alone. Reality was teaching them what I couldn't. The first few weeks were silent. No calls, no texts, no contact. I imagined them struggling to figure out how 2 adults making $80,000 combined could possibly survive. The math that had seemed impossible was actually quite simple when you stopped trying to maintain a lifestyle meant for someone earning 3 times that amount. Then, one afternoon in early September, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Danielle standing there with Emma and Joshua. The children looked happy enough, though their clothes were noticeably less designer than before. Danielle looked tired but different somehow. Her hair was pulled back simply, no expensive salon treatment. She wore jeans and a plain shirt. No jewelry except her wedding band. The upgraded version had been pawned months ago. "Dad," she said quietly, "can we come in?" I stepped aside. Emma and Joshua ran past me toward the backyard, already knowing where my desert garden was. They'd always loved the cacti. Danielle sat on my couch, hands folded in her lap. "I got a job, office manager at a dental practice. It's not glamorous, but it's $42,000 a year with benefits. That's good." Brandon found work too. Smaller dealership, less commission potential, $38,000. She looked up at me. "We're making it work. Barely. But we're making it." I sat across from her, waiting. "I came to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not because we need money. We don't expect anything from you. But because I need you to know that I understand now what I lost." Tears began running down her face. I lost my father, the man who would have done anything for me, and I lost him because I became someone who only saw value in dollar signs. "What changed?" I asked. "Living on what we actually earn, shopping at discount stores, cooking at home because we can't afford restaurants, telling Emma she can't have the expensive shoes all her friends have." She wiped her eyes. Realizing that when everything else fell away, the only person who'd ever really sacrificed for us was the one we'd treated worst. Through the window I could see Emma and Joshua examining a flowering cactus, their small faces full of wonder at something that cost nothing. "I was a terrible daughter," Danielle continued. "I let Brandon talk about you like you were nothing. I stood by while his parents acted superior. I believed their version of success and dismissed yours." She looked directly at me. "You worked for 38 years, saved carefully, and gave us everything, and I called you a failure." "Yes, you did. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it. What you did. What I became. What I lost." We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, "Tell me about your apartment." She blinked at the change of subject. "It's small. The kids share a bedroom, but it's clean and the neighbors are nice. We have a little balcony where I'm trying to grow herbs, not very successfully." A small smile. "I think about your cacti and how patient you have to be with them. Patience is underrated. I'm learning that." She stood. "I should let you go. I needed to say this in person." "Danielle." I stood too. "You're welcome to visit. Bring the kids. Not every week. You have your own life to build. But the door isn't locked." The relief on her face was almost painful to see. "Really?" "Really, but on one condition." "Anything." "No more apologies. I heard this one. Now show me through your actions that you meant it." She nodded, crying again, and impulsively hugged me. I hugged her back, the first time I'd embraced my daughter in months. It felt like a beginning. A week later, my phone rang. Brandon. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Mr. Harper?" His voice was different, quieter, less cocky. "I was wondering if we could meet, just for coffee. I'd like to talk." We met at a small cafe near my house. Brandon arrived in jeans and a polo shirt, driving a 10-year-old Honda, presumably bought for cash after losing the Mercedes. He looked thinner, older, humbled. "Thank you for meeting me," he started. I sipped my coffee and waited. I've been wanting to call for weeks, but I didn't know what to say. He stared at his own cup. Every apology I could think of sounded hollow. Most apologies are. Yeah, he nodded. So instead of apologizing, I want to explain something. Not as an excuse. There's no excuse for how I treated you, but as context. I'm listening. I grew up watching my father play the successful businessman. Big house, nice cars, always picking up the check, and I wanted to be like him. No, I wanted to be better than him. He laughed bitterly. Turns out neither of us was what we pretended to be. Your father had a successful business. He just wasn't as liquid as he appeared. And I was living on your money while mocking you for not being successful enough. He met my eyes. That dinner, when I said you'd never be half the man my father was, I was really trying to convince myself that I'd married up, that Danielle came from less and I was giving her more. I was so focused on that narrative that I couldn't see the truth, which was that you were the only one giving us anything, and I was too proud and stupid to see it. He paused. The new job is hard. I'm selling used cars to people with bad credit. It's humbling, but it's honest. And after months of living on your charity while treating you like garbage, honest feels important. I studied him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like actual self-awareness. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. I don't even expect you to like me. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what you were teaching us. Sometimes the greatest gift is letting someone hit bottom so they can learn to climb back up. How's Danielle doing? She's strong. Stronger than I gave her credit for. She makes dinner every night. Real cooking, not takeout. She found a community center daycare for the kids that's affordable. She's building a real life instead of the fantasy we were living. He smiled slightly. She's happier than she was in that big house. We talked for another 20 minutes. Not about the past. That ground had been covered. About his new job. About Emma's adjustment to public school. About the small victories of living within your means. When we parted, Brandon shook my hand. Thank you for the lesson, even if I hated learning it. The best lessons usually hurt the most. Later that month, Danielle invited me to dinner at their apartment. I brought wine. Not expensive, just something decent from the local store. The apartment was tiny but clean. Danielle had made it homey with inexpensive decorations and family photos. The kids' shared bedroom had hand-painted murals. Apparently Brandon had artistic talents I'd never known about. Dinner was simple, spaghetti and salad, but Danielle had cooked it herself. Emma and Joshua chattered about school and their new friends. The conversation was genuine, without the performance that had characterized every meal at the Scottsdale house. As I left that evening, Emma hugged me tight. I love coming to your house, Grandpa, and I love having you here too. Simple words from a 6-year-old, but they meant more than any apology. October in Phoenix brings relief from the brutal heat. The temperature drops into the 80s, and people remember why they live in the desert. I spent more time in my greenhouse, tending to plants that had survived the harsh summer. Like my cacti, Danielle and Brandon were proving they could adapt to difficult conditions. 2 months had passed since they'd moved to Glendale. 2 months of making their combined $80,000 stretch to cover rent, utilities, groceries, daycare, transportation. 2 months of learning what most people know instinctively, that you can't spend more than you earn forever. They were making it work. More importantly, they were changing. I saw it in small ways. Danielle started bringing the kids to visit every other weekend, not asking for anything, just spending time. Brandon took them to free events at the park instead of expensive entertainment. Emma and Joshua seemed happier with less stuff and more attention. One afternoon in mid-October, I made a decision. Not to return to the old way. That door was permanently closed, but to offer support in a different form. I called Danielle. I've been thinking about Emma and Joshua. Oh, her voice held a note of concern. They're in public daycare now, right? Yes, it's fine. Not fancy, but the teachers are good. I'd like to help with that cost, not the expensive place you had before, the one you're using now, $700 a month. Silence. Then, Dad, you don't have to... I know I don't have to, but they're my grandchildren, and you've proven over the past few months that you can handle your responsibilities without my help. This isn't about funding your lifestyle. It's about making sure Emma and Joshua have good care while you work. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use the money for exactly what it's intended for, and that if your situation improves and you don't need it anymore, you'll tell me. I will, I promise. A pause. Thank you, Dad. You're welcome. It felt good to help, but on my terms, with boundaries, for the right reasons. A few days later, another call came. This one surprised me more. Laverne, it's Dennis Mitchell. I was wondering if we could talk, in person. We met at a coffee shop. Dennis looked different, less polished, more genuine somehow. The facade of the successful businessman had cracked, revealing someone more human underneath. I owe you an apology, he began. A real one. Not the panicked, self-serving version I gave you in July. Go on. For 8 years, I took credit for your generosity. I told myself I was just a middleman, that it didn't really matter who the money came from. But it did matter. Because every time Brandon thanked me, every time I played the benefactor, I was stealing your relationship with your daughter. He looked older than I remembered. Lisa and I have been going to counseling, talking about how we present ourselves versus who we really are. It's been illuminating. How's your relationship with Brandon? Honest, for the first time in years. He knows I'm not the golden goose he thought I was. We're rebuilding based on reality instead of illusion. Dennis smiled sadly. It's harder, but better. Good. I wanted to apologize to you properly. Publicly, if you're willing. Lisa and I are having a family dinner next week. Small gathering, our kids, you, Danielle, and Brandon. I'd like to apologize in front of everyone for my role in this situation. I considered it. Public apologies can be performances, but something about Dennis's demeanor suggested this one would be genuine. All right, I'll be there. The dinner took place the following Sunday. Just family. Dennis and Lisa, their daughter and son-in-law, Danielle and Brandon, me and the grandchildren playing in another room. Dennis stood, glass in hand, but not for a toast, just to speak. I want to address something that happened earlier this year, something I'm ashamed of. He looked directly at me. Laverne, for 8 years you funded a significant portion of my son's life, and I took credit for it. I let Brandon, let everyone believe I was the generous father supporting my children, when in reality I was simply the conduit for your sacrifice. Lisa nodded supportively. The room was silent. I compromised my integrity because I liked being seen as successful and generous. I betrayed your trust and damaged your relationship with Danielle. For that, I am truly sorry. He paused. You taught us all a valuable lesson about the difference between appearance and reality, about what real support looks like versus performative generosity. I'm grateful for that lesson, even though it was painful to learn. He sat down. There was no applause, no dramatic moment, just the quiet acknowledgement of truth spoken aloud. Later, as I was leaving, Danielle walked me to my car. She handed me something, a small wooden picture frame, clearly handmade. Inside were photos of Emma and Joshua, recent ones showing them laughing and playing. At the bottom, in Danielle's handwriting, to the best father, I am sorry it took losing everything to see what mattered. I held the frame carefully. This is beautiful. I made it myself, took a woodworking class at the community center. She smiled. Turns out, when you can't afford to buy expensive gifts, you learn to make things. Sometimes the things we make ourselves matter more. Yeah, she hugged me. I love you, Dad. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. I love you too. And I never gave up. I just stopped enabling. Driving home that evening, I thought about the past 8 months. The confrontation at the restaurant, the methodical dismantling of their financial house of cards, the revelation at the 4th of July barbecue, the slow rebuilding that followed. I'd set out to teach them a lesson about gratitude, about living within your means, about the difference between real support and the appearance of it. But I'd learned something too. That love sometimes means letting people fall, that the hardest form of help is stepping back and allowing natural consequences to teach what words cannot. That night, sitting in my greenhouse among the cacti I'd carefully nurtured, I reflected on the journey. These plants survived and even thrived in harsh conditions because they'd adapted. They'd learned to do more with less. Danielle and Brandon were learning the same lesson, and they were surviving. More than that, they were growing stronger. My phone buzzed, a text from Danielle. Emma wants to know if she can help you water the cacti next weekend. She says she wants to learn how to take care of plants that don't need much. I smiled and typed back, "Tell her yes, and that the secret is patience and knowing when not to give them too much water." "Like people?" she replied, "exactly like people." I set down the phone and looked at the photo frame she'd made. My grandchildren's faces, happy despite living in a tiny apartment, despite having less than they'd once had. Happy because their parents were present, working hard, showing them that character mattered more than square footage. I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd saved it. By refusing to continue funding an unsustainable illusion, I'd forced them to build something real. The plan had never been about revenge, not really. It had been about justice, about consequences, about teaching people who'd taken everything for granted what those things actually cost. And now, 8 months after walking out of that restaurant, I could finally see the results. My daughter was learning to stand on her own. My son-in-law was learning humility. My grandchildren were learning that love didn't come with a price tag. I picked up my watering can, the small one for careful measured doses, and tended to my cacti. Each drop of water deliberate and controlled. Too much would kill them. Too little would starve them. The right amount at the right time helped them flourish. Sometimes the greatest love is knowing when to give and when to withhold, when to support and when to step back, when to be visible and when to let them find their own way. I'd spent 8 years invisibly supporting an illusion. Now I was visible, present, and helping build something real. The desert night settled over Phoenix, cool and clear. In the distance, I could hear traffic on the highway, people going somewhere, coming from somewhere, living their lives. I was living mine too, finally on my own terms, with relationships based on truth instead of transactions. Sometimes the greatest love is letting them fall so they can learn to walk on their own, and watching them stand up again. That was the real victory. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.